Hello, this is Game 4 of the British Chess Championships. I'm playing as black against Stephen Pride. So the game starts with d4, knight f6, bishop c4. I like to play c5 here. It looks like a pawn sacrifice at first, but a black can immediately recapture the pawn with this queen a5 check idea. You're checking the king so you can pick up the pawn on c5 in the next turn. But that's not the best way to play in this position. The best way to play is knight a6 to recover the pawn with the knight instead of the queen, because, well, you always get told this as a beginner, don't develop your queen in the opening. It's better to involve your other pieces instead in the opening, so that's why we use the knight to recapture the pawn instead of the queen. Now, obviously, white can defend the pawn. For example, there's queen d4 and bishop e3, but these moves aren't optimal. So this one over here, this queen d4 move, basically you're not supposed to develop your queen early on in the opening, so that's why it's not the best move to play. There's also bishop e3, which basically means that you're gonna have to move the same piece twice during the opening, which is also not the best way to play. You're also blocking this e pawn over here, so you can't push the e pawn anymore if your bishop is sitting on e3. White usually ends up giving away the pawn, so we recapture with knight. We can easily control the center because one of white's central pawns are gone and traded off for the c pawn over here. So yeah, black's just really comfortable. So that's why I really like and I recommend this opening. This guy didn't take. He played c3 instead, defending the pawn. This is still within my preparation. I knew that queen b6 is the best way to play. Attacking this b2 pawn, queen moves over to defend. I'm supposed to take and trade pawns here. Black is already slightly advantageous, so that highlights the effectiveness of this opening, I guess. I misplayed this a bit. I misremembered my opening. I played d5 instead, sort of just gaining control over the center here. So we have trades, queen takes, he develops the knight. I play knight c6 with the idea of e5 to kick the bishop away, earn some tempo as well. So in this sort of position, I know that knight h5 is a good idea, trading the knight for the bishop. Traditionally, knights and bishops are both worth 3 points in material, but modern analysis shows that bishops are worth slightly more than knight, just very slightly though, so I mean, trading the knight for a bishop it doesn't give a tremendous advantage, but like it can't be a bad idea, if you know what I mean. There's also h5, h4. That's an alternative idea. It's also good, like sort of equally as good as the knight h5 idea. The idea is to just gain some space, kick the bishop out. Obviously, you won't win the bishop because white has time to play h3 and tuck the bishop back to h2, but regardless, you still gain some space as black, so it's still good. Both of them are viable options. I just decided to go with h5 randomly. So yeah, h5, h4, bishop retreats to h2. So over here I play g6 with the idea of developing the bishop either to g7 or h6. I haven't decided yet, but playing g6 means that I can develop the bishop in one move instead of two moves. Another idea behind g6 is to allow this bishop f5 move, which could be useful sometime in the future. Anyways, g6 turns out to be not the best move. That's because white can play knight f3, basically exploiting the weakness of the e5 pawn, which is just defended once. So that provokes a reaction from me. I have to react to this, otherwise I lose a pawn. So there's basically two viable options in this position, which is bishop d6 to defend the pawn, which basically invalidates my g6 move because I'm no longer intending to develop my bishop to g7 or h6. But also bishop d6, and there's this idea of bishop d3. There are sacrifice ideas. Some of you might see e4 as a way to refute this line, essentially forking these two pieces, but we have the very clever move b4, which basically kicks the queen away, which is relevant because if the queen is kicked away, then white can get this bishop over here. So it's not the end of the world because we obviously win the piece back, but it won't be a pleasant position for black after all these trades happen. So for example, we can play pawn takes bishop, counterattacking their queen. However, all white has to do is just move out of the way. But then we're still left with the same problem, that is, our queen is under attack, and if it moves, then this allows bishop takes bishop, and we have this super weird an awkward pawn on d3 that's probably just going to fall in a couple of moves. And then we have a bishop on d6, which is preventing us from castling, and it can't be easily kicked out either, so it's just a bad position for black. The alternative to defending the pawn is a pawn push, but that allows white to place their knight onto e5. And, well, of course we can trade, but then white gets a very good bishop on e5. So let's say, for example, bishop g7 defending the knight. Knight comes in, attacking the queen, queen drops back, attacking the bishop, bishop drops back, and we now have to deal with ideas like the bishop or the knight coming in to c5, or the bishop giving a check on b5, stuff like that. Sure, we can play b6, but b6 allows bishop b5 check, and a6 allows the knight or the bishop to come in. So like we can't prevent both of these entry squares at once. So it's just really unpleasant for black in this situation over here. Knight c3 would have been really bad for me. Fortunately, this guy played knight b3, which is quite a bad move because with the knight no longer on d2, this knight e4 idea becomes more relevant to me as black. So this is just a one move threat, doesn't do anything. I just moved the queen, and he played g4 in this position, which is a terrible move, to be honest. The only way to get an advantage as black over here is to take en passant. So you can see over here that everything else is drawish. En passant gives a very clear advantage. And to see why this is such a clean advantage, it's just a simple matter of calculation. If we take en passant, you have to take with the bishop. If you take with the pawn, then you allow queen takes. Let's say you block with the queen. We just do a queen trade. And just look at this position. Black has control over the center, very good control over the center. Black's also up a pawn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So like it should just be a very easy win for black. So bishop takes is necessary. Now we return to the knight e4 idea, which is only made possible because white decided to play knight b3, relinquishing control over the e4 square, which is why knight b3 is not a really good move. Additionally, knight e4 also comes with tempo because we're threatening to take the bishop, and obviously again pawn takes allows queen takes. So yeah, the best thing white can do is to just retreat the bishop back, but then we have bishop c5 threatening this discovery here, bishop to d3, but then we have a5, a4, kick the knight out, bishop c5, potential sacrifice ideas. It's just everything is just collapsing for white here. So in this moment, my opponent played queen e2, so I traded because this would leave the e3 pawn weak, which I immediately exploited with bishop h6. So yeah, my g6 move comes in handy, allowing the one move development of the bishop to a6, where it immediately pressures the e3 pawn. Now I also noticed that white has basically no move or no resources available to defend this e3 pawn over here, as you can easily observe as well. You can move your knight around, the rook, the bishop, whatever. Like, none of these moves defend the pawn, so we're just gonna win it next turn. You can, of course, push the pawn, but then we have pawn takes, queen takes, bishop f5, and like, just white's king is still in the center. It's at a very dangerous spot. We have our bishops on really good diagonals, this queen as well. We can long castle. White's just, it's just game over for white over here. Since none of these moves protects the pawn, white is forced to play king c2, which is quite weakening. So I played the obvious move f5 with the obvious idea of f4, trading these pawns away. If these pawns are gone, then that's good news for me. The king will be even more weak. Also with the idea of opening up the f-file once the trade takes place, which is good because the king is on the f-file. It basically makes the attack easier for me. We have bishop g2. I defended the pawn because bishop g2 was attacking the d5 pawn. Also a good opportunity to develop the bishop, maybe long castles. Rook here, adding further pressure onto the d5 pawn. Long castles defends the pawn. We have rook here, maybe looking to double or whatever, but I just continued with my attack basically. I played f4, which is the idea I mentioned previously, and then we have c4. I guess the idea is to go c5, block the queen out. I saw this idea of e4, kicking the rook away. If rook moves away, then we have f3, forking these two pieces. We earn a minor piece. But of course, we have to keep a lookout for c5 here. So for example, if white plays c5, we can play pawn takes rook, and importantly, this counterattacks white's queen. So yeah, I calculated that c5 doesn't work, which means that white has nothing better to do than to retreat the rook backwards, and that will allow f3, which forks these two pieces, which means I earn a minor piece. So anyways, with the incoming threat of f3, white decided to sacrifice their bishop. I just recapture. We have a trade of rooks, pawn takes, and my tactical vision switched on. I saw that this pawn was pinned, which means that bishop takes f4 is possible. I just wanted to end the game quickly, so I just played this immediately. Bang. But I didn't see that white had c5, this resource from earlier that I was talking about. It blocks the queen's diagonal, meaning that this bishop is now under attack, and simultaneously my queen is also under attack, which means that I have two pieces hanging, which means I'm going to lose one of these pieces. Obviously the bishop, not the queen. So I started panicking here because, damn it, I thought I was winning, now I'm just losing a piece. But then I remembered, okay, yeah, I just won a piece like a couple moves ago, so this wouldn't be that bad. But also, like, my position here is just super good. This pawn is really good. It's controlling very important key squares here. It's preventing the knight from developing. It's allowing sort of rook d3 ideas. So yeah, I thought this can't possibly be bad for me. And once that panic has simmered down a bit, I also found queen c7, which is a really powerful move, because if you decide to recapture the bishop, then my queen jumps into the game. And you can't block because of this, really powerful pawn over here, which means that you're forced to move your king away. This all actually happened in the game, by the way. We have this really strong rook over here, and noticing that my rook controls the escape squares, I found queen g3, and white has two options here. Option 1 is queen f2. Option 2 is king f1. King f1 fails because of rook f8. So white has to block, but that's futile. Black has checkmate in a couple of moves anyway. And queen f2, which was played during the game, loses due to rook d1. Distraction tactic. If the king takes the rook, then we take the queen. Of course, the king can ignore and go to e2 instead, but we deliver another check. And look at this, all of the squares are covered, meaning that white has no other option other than to take the rook, but we established that that is not good because we just lose the queen. So, yeah, it was in this position that Stephen Pride resigned, and I won my third game in the championships. But who knows what will happen in the last game. If you want to find out, keep an eye on my channel and stay tuned.